Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Stewart Mitchell is an author. He's a human and animal rights activist. He's a poet. He's a bit of a comedian. Everybody go check out Vegan Seinfeld on Instagram. He's a mental health advocate. And a lot of you may know him actually as the Vigilante Vegan on Instagram. So Stewart, thanks so much for sitting down with me today.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. And we actually filmed a whole interview a few days ago and it didn't get recorded, so I'm really grateful you got the patience to sit through it because we went over some really important topics, so I want to make sure people have a chance to hear it.
Right.
So my first question is, now that all 4 police officers who murdered George Floyd have been arrested, what can the animal rights movement and what can people like myself who were not targeted by the police just because of the color of our skin, what could we be doing to support our black family and friends to make a real lasting change, like a more permanent change, just beyond, because, hopefully it doesn't happen again in the near future, but in all likelihood, based on the pattern, based on systemic racism, will. So we'll talk about economics in a second, but let's focus on police brutality first. Like, what do you think we can be doing to make a difference?
I think it's very important that people continue to be vocal and continue to stand by their black comrades and not let this fizzle out. Like once it goes into the distance, as far as the media is concerned, I think that we should still be vocal. We should take this fight to City Hall, take this fight to our elected officials and put it in their lap and make them accountable for it. Sign petitions, go to hearings and make this a fight on all fronts, not just in the streets, but on all fronts. Take it to, like I said, people in your community that you hold accountable for things like this, for police brutality, So it's very important that everybody gets involved and everybody pulls their share of the weight, because I don't want to say that our allies or white people made it their fight, but if you decided that that's what you did or that's what you want to do, go all the way with it and just follow it through. Make sure that we get the results that we want at the end of the day, because black lives does indeed matter. And in order to make change, like, we have to go all the way. We have to make this a fight on all fronts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I look at it, I'm a bit of a history nerd, and I look at it through the lens of history too. Just myself, for being of Jewish ancestry, for like 2,000 years, Jews were repeatedly, oppressed through a million different ways in Europe, culminating in the Holocaust. And it wasn't until, the allied nations of the world got together against Nazi Germany, and until Germany as a country, non-Jewish Germans changed, that ended. So by proxy, I think that black people have been fighting for their rights since they first got kidnapped from Africa. And it's going to take, and since the 60s, since civil rights became official, and people have been trying to resist, to fight against systemic oppression. But it's really going to take everybody to make a difference, Wanda Sykes had a great video, came out a few days ago, and she said, she was really frank. She said, white people, this is your problem. Like, you caused it. You got to step up to actually end it,
Right.
So.
I can agree with that. I don't like to put the burden of what happens to Black America in this current generation's lap, but they do kind of reap the benefits of what happens to us. And I say that all the time, is that if you're against this fight, then that means you somehow benefit from how the system is set up right now. And you're right, this isn't something that just happened last week or Memorial Day weekend. This is something that has been going on since slavery, since people have been trying to abolish slavery. Like, white people have always lent their hands in trying to abolish this systemic oppression against Africans, Afro-Americans, Negroes, or any other name that you call black people throughout history. But it's always been a fight, not just for us, by us, for us, but it takes the help of outside entities as well. And history has shown that all the way into the civil rights era with the Freedom Riders. up into like Bernie Sanders was on the front line. A lot of people are pro Bernie. A lot of people love Bernie Sanders. Follow his example. You know, he put his ass on the line and he was out there and he paid the price because he was fighting a racist system that oppressed people of color. And that just goes to show you that this isn't something that happened over Memorial Day weekend. This has been going on for decades. This has been going on for years, hundreds of years. And here we are in 2020, and we're still in this fight. And it's embarrassing as an American to say that this is still something that happens in this country, and that we still have to fight it. And we still have to convince the rest of the country, the rest of America, our judicial system, that black people lives matter, and that this double standard of justice in America cannot hold up for any longer, and we won't stand for it.
100% agree. And actually, I want to get to systemic racism because you brought that up. But before we move on from police brutality, because that's the specific issue that got us started, we talked last time about Killer Mike's speech about, the practical things people do. And you mentioned, voting at the city level. And that's just something I really want to emphasize to people, that cops, supposedly they work for the people they serve and protect. But they don't actually, go up to a person on the street and say, what would you like me to do? No, they answer to their sergeant, who answers to the captain, who answers to the mayor, or if you live in a rural area, a county, commissioner. So that's really it. It's not even a president or necessarily a governor that come in. It's at the local level. And those, even people who are politically active, can easily overlook that. And that's, I think, one of the key lessons, that people need to pay attention to that. And if heads start rolling there, if police start getting fired, if police chiefs start getting fired, and cops, think about it this way, like any other job. If there was certain behavior on a certain type of job and people got fired all the time for it, employees would learn quick. Like, oh, I wouldn't do that, or you're going to get fired. You're going to lose this job, right? And police have been straight up getting away with murder this whole time. And that's like, if we have that accountability, it's not going to solve all the systemic racism, but of just this most egregious problem of police murder and police brutality, I think it would make a massive difference. So pay attention to your local elections is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And you're right, there has to be some accountability. And I think that it's going to take people, police officers, to be made examples of. And not a lot of that happens. And I think that's the problem, is they're very well protected, right, wrong, or indifferent. Whatever they do, they're protected. And you're right, there are people that have jobs that when they make a mistake, a lot of times it'll cost them their job. And police is really the only, police officers really the only job that you can make mistake after mistake. A lot of times we see these officers, once what they did become public, we start to learn that these cops have a history of abuse of power. So it's really, excuse me, it's really the only job where you can continually make mistakes, even up to the point where you take somebody's life and they'll let you off the hook and you can keep your job. And that's got to change. I think that there has to be more accountability, and they have to make examples of these police officers. We hear so much of these good police officers, but we never see them. So, and we need accountability on their part too. Where's the good cops that stand up and say that guy or that officer doesn't represent what this police department is about? So we need accountability.
Yeah. And also, clearly there's a systemic problem here, and it's even, beyond the U.S. as well. Like in many countries you see, it's partly down to human psychology. If you give someone that much power that police have, it's often human nature to exploit it and to take full advantage of it. So even if there is some good cops who never, abuse people, and they're not racist and they don't do bad things, like we can't be relying on that when clearly the whole system is messed up. And if you change the system, then it's like you flip it. So the majority of people are supposed to be doing the right thing. On that note, I want to ask you, because I know you've been to a lot of the events in New York. I'm seeing a lot of discussion that I found really interesting lately about this concept of defunding the police, or at least shifting funding and shifting a lot of activity away from what police do to, social services, to mental health advocates. Have you been hearing a lot about that, talking to people about that at all?
I haven't had talks about it. I've been hearing about it. Just based on the little bit of information that I have, I do agree with it. Like I said, I think that's a part of holding police accountable. When you defund them, it kind of takes away from the power that they have over the public that they took an oath to serve and protect. I think it would, again, it goes back to accountability. It would make sure that they are doing their jobs based on what the oath said. I mean, based on the oath that they took, as opposed to what I believe is they have another interest at hand. It has nothing to do with the public. It has more to do with businesses and corporations. I think that we should take that away from them and make them accountable for what happens to people on the streets. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's part of the solution. But we have to like reevaluate the whole police department and come up with some answers. Like I'm not going to pretend like I know all of the answers, because I don't. But I know that we do need reform. I do know that I think defunding these departments is a step in that direction, a step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I think this is one of the many reasons it's good that animal rights activists are getting involved in the struggle, because I wasn't really familiar with a lot of the details of like what does systemic change look like, and a fellow animal rights activist shared this infographic recently about defunding the police, and they explained it in a way that just made so much sense to me. Like kicking off with the idea, have you ever heard the expression, if you have a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail? You know, so if you're sending armed police to deal with situations where like that is not, it's like there's a mental health issue and nobody's actually being threatened. All too often it's tragic. Someone ends up getting shot. So what they're saying, and a lot of ex-chiefs of police agree with this, is that a majority of what cops deal with should be dealt with by social workers, mental health advocates who are unarmed, who there's never going to be a situation where they would even shoot someone because they don't have guns. And only in the situations where it's a serious emergency, an armed situation, it's a school shooting, there's somebody with a gun that's attacking another person, you know, that's the only situations where you use cops. And they're specifically trained for that. Obviously, they still need better training, better accountability, etc. But you completely remove. And then you also use some of the money there's so much funding going to police, like enormous amounts of money of every budget is being given to them. Use some of that money to deal with the root causes of the problems, whether it's mental health, whether it's poverty, you know, and that way you could start eliminating some of the causes of crime in the first place, you know. So that's something that makes a lot of sense to me. It's a middle ground, because I know people who are like, abolish the police, anarchists, you know, and I'm like, well, I don't know how that's going to work. What's going to happen after the police are abolished? And then there's people who think there's no problem. Whereas like defunding them or shifting funding is a reasonable solution, in my opinion. But
I think so. We're not ready for anarchy. I think a lot of people, I would like to believe that in my heart I'm an anarchist, but I'm smart enough to know that we're not ready for an anarchist utopia. There's still people that think that they are, but are not willing to give up what they have in order to benefit everyone. Do we need police in this society? I believe we do. But like you said, I agree with what you said about mental health issues and how to handle certain situations. Because a lot of situations that could have been handled a lot better, that didn't have to end fatally, could have been handled on that level of mental health, because a lot of problems do kind of stem from that. So, you know, I like I said, I don't have all of the answers. I always thought that police should be trained to, if you're going to have to shoot for like extremities, shoot to incapacitate a person, but not to take their life. I don't know why police are trained to kill. To me, it gives them more of an incentive to murder, because I really do believe a lot of these police become police because they have this desire to cause harm to people, to kill people. And I can point out one specific incident when a couple of years ago, I remember this kid was running down my block and the police chased after him, and they caught the kid, they detained him, they brought him, they handcuffed him. And as the police were walking back up the block, I heard one of them. He might have been a rookie. He was a young kid. He said, "Oh, I was hoping to see somebody get shot. I wanted to see somebody get shot." He was talking to another police officer, and to me, it seems like they get a rush from that, like just the thrill of killing somebody, to have that power to take a person's life. And I'm not saying this applies to all police, but it seems like it applies to a lot of them. I mean, if you look at what's going on in our country, I mean, I've been looking at statistics, and I know statistics can be manipulated, but it looks like when it comes to United States, we kill more, like our police officers kill more civilians than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
And that's alarming. And I mean, I could believe those statistics because when you look around, like it's happening every day. I mean, it's happening to black people. It happens to white people as well. But I mean, it's happening way too often. Things that could have been handled without the use of force are pretty much ending in these unfortunate fatalities when it could have been avoided.
Yeah. No, I've seen that statistic too. I mean, American police are notoriously trigger happy, right? And I mean, I did see a stat that was very, it was peer reviewed and everything. It was actually about gun violence. And it was saying that so they're comparing American states to American states. So it's not like, a country on the other side of the world to U.S., because there's a lot of different factors there. Just U.S. states to U.S. states. And states that have more loose, weak gun laws, where just anyone can acquire like an AR-15, AK-47, whatever it is, versus states with stricter gun laws, had higher rates of both police shooting people, armed people, unarmed people, and people shooting police. And like literally all forms of violence, from suicide to domestic violence to murder to mass shootings and everything. So it just shows, because I want to get to politics in a second, it shows that there's bigger problems at stake here. When there's a flood of guns, when there's too many guns, you have police walking around in fear. And that all too often, as we see, leads to tragedy. I'm not trying to excuse by any means a cop who would ever shoot somebody in a situation not supposed to, but I'm saying they're in a situation, I'm born and raised in Canada, and it's not night and day. We have guns here, we have murder here, and we have police brutality and police murder here. But it's a significant difference in terms of, quantity. And I think part of that has to do with the gun laws, in the sense that police here are not scared in the same way that they are in the United States. Again, that doesn't excuse them from what they're doing, but I just want to bring that up. So on a note of politics, dealing with the bigger picture issues here, imagine that if you could snap your fingers and all of a sudden there's no more police racist violence, and the police don't kill anyone. Is it all good in that situation? Is there actual equality in America? Is the history of racism solved, or is there other bigger issues that need to be dealt with?
No, that's just a small piece of what goes on as far as racism in this country goes. No, it doesn't. I don't think it solves a whole lot of problems. There's still problems that black people face in this country that's really not highlighted as often as police brutality. I think police brutality is at the forefront because it's the most visible form of racism. But there's other forms of racism in this country that have to be addressed. I mean, there's no equality here in America, regardless of what they tell you. And there's other, like for instance, there's communities right here in New York City that have been gentrified, and now they're making it hard for black and brown people to find adequate housing or affordable housing. And that's a product of systemic racism. That's a product of economic racism, or economic, I can't find the words right now, but
Inequality.
Inequality, yes, thank you. But it puts black and brown people at a disadvantage as opposed to their white counterparts. So, I mean, that's another branch of racism, if you will. But there's many more. But it doesn't solve the problem of racism in this country by a long shot. Not at all. I mean, if you look at the rate at which black and brown men and women are incarcerated as opposed to white people, there's work to be done there, because we seem to get locked up more for smaller infractions than white people who commit more heinous crimes. So we have work to do on all fronts. I mean, like, it's a whole system of racism, and it all has to be looked at and fixed and move forward. Like, there has to be equality in this country. There's no equality. I mean, I can't, like I said, when it comes to politics and things like that, I mean, I know I have surface information and surface knowledge on these things, enough to know that there's a problem. I'm not going to pretend like I have all of the solutions. I'm willing to listen to people and help where I can, but I do know that there's a major problem in this country in regards to how they treat black people, and it has to be addressed. And police brutality is just the beginning of that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit it right on when you said that police brutality gets attention because it's the most obvious form, or, it's like an action thing. It's somebody shot someone and this is caught on camera, or somebody's roughing someone up. But I was going to say arguably, but I don't even think it is arguably. I think it's a fact that the other forms of economic inequality kill far more people than the police do. And the police kill a lot of people, tragically. Talking about higher rates of heart disease, higher rates of cancer, the fact that poor communities are always, like, when they have toxic waste sites, coal power plants, it's always going to be next to poor communities, factory farms, so there's a million different ways that poor people, regardless of skin color, are going to suffer. But because of history, because of slavery, because of segregation, it's disproportionately more people of color are poor than white people. And that's never going to be solved until there's a redistribution of wealth, until there's actually taken from the billionaires and the corporations and redistributing around, and that's the conversation. There's decent people on the right who are like, hey, what happened to George Floyd is wrong. That cop should be fired. I'm like, okay, cool. We can all agree on that. But they don't want to have that conversation about actually redistributing money, because maybe some of those people are multimillionaires. Maybe,
No, you're asking them to give up something that would benefit them. And I mean, I understand how capitalism works in this country. In order for somebody to be on top, there has to be somebody on the bottom. And these people in this position of wealth and power are not willing to give up that power, because in order for them to maintain that power, somebody has to be on the bottom. And they don't want to be equal to anybody, because capitalism is basically kill or be killed. It's dog eat dog. And it's about competition. It's about competitiveness. And these people are not willing to give up what they have to make sure that others have like adequate housing and jobs that can provide food, clothing, and shelter without having to think about what your paycheck is going to go to this week, as opposed to what it's going to do for you next week. These people don't have those problems. These are problems that working class people have, black and brown, poor people have. And they don't want to put themselves not on a level of poor people, but just enough to see them get by, because you need people to make just enough to survive in order for them to come back to work the next week, in order to slave again, in order to pay bills or buy food or just provide adequately for their families. So these people are not ready to give up that type of power, I don't believe.
Yeah. And I think it's a tragedy that historically, I don't know if you heard this, that in the South, some of the ruling class people realized early on after slavery that you have majority of the population is still poor. Most white people and most black people are still poor. And if they all got together and overthrew the wealthy people, it'd be over for them. So they intentionally reinforced racism against black people. I mean, sure, this is true nationwide, but particularly in the South, so that that animosity that should have been directed at the wealthy people who are living large off of the work of everyone else was directed at black people. And you see that today, where you have, poor working class white people who really should be unified to demand health care, to demand wealth care redistributed. And instead, all too often they're actually a base of support for some of the most extremist right-wing groups. And it's a really kind of ugly manifestation of racism. Whereas if people were actually get together, almost everyone would win. I mean, if you're taking wealth from the 1% to give it to everyone else, first of all, you're not actually hurting the 1%. Their heads aren't getting chopped off. You're just taking some of their billions that they have, or some of their millions. They're still going to have more money. but everyone else wins, you know? And it's such a simple and obvious solution, and it's not like a theoretical thing, like, oh, maybe if we did it. Nah, look at countries like Norway, Denmark, Scandinavia. They're not perfect, but they tax their rich people a lot more, and they have a lot less poverty. It's, you know, it's that simple. So I think the United States is overdue for that, but I think that conversation has been tainted with like, oh, that's socialism, that's evil, when it's like, let's ignore those words because people get triggered by that. Just like, let's talk about healthcare, let's talk about better education, you know, and where does that money come from? It comes from the people who have too much money. You
Right.
don't need the money. So,
Well, what you were talking about as far as poor white people, that's because of a white supremacy mindset. I think that even though there are some poor whites, they believe because they are white that they are more superior to so-called African Americans just based on the fact that they're white. When you talk about socialism, like we've been conditioned to believe that this is a bad thing and that it's evil. And America is really good at spreading propaganda to scare people and make them believe that there are certain things that ultimately will benefit them or bad for them. And they've been very successful at it. I don't understand how. But when you talk about healthcare, when you talk about schooling, education, and things that people can benefit from, like you have even poor people, poor whites that believe that this is evil, like people should not have access to this. And I just don't understand how they interpret that. Like it's mind-boggling to me. Things that they would benefit from too as well. And you know, it's mind-boggling that they've been fooled into believing that these things are evil.
yeah. I mean, I see it over and over again when I talk to people and I suggest these things. They're like, oh, you want Soviet Union or you want Venezuela? And I gotta break it down like this. Like, if you think the USSR is socialist because it's Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, then you must think North Korea is a democracy because it's the Democratic Republic of North Korea. Like, people just got to think a bit deeper. Or, like I was saying, just ignore the labels. Ignore the labels and just talk about specific policies and say, you know, like you said, we need healthcare, we need this. Yeah. So I don't think, like, to me, I don't care about the word socialism at all. Throw it out the window. Who cares? What matters to me is that people have what they need to survive, have the basic minimum. And again, it's not something you go to theory. You could look at countries or even compare states to states and be like, yo, this works. This policy works. I mentioned to you last time, I've lived in Canada, I've lived in the United States, and like, spoiler alert, it's better to have healthcare. And it's just that simple. You know, government needs to guarantee universal healthcare, and that's a fundamental. That doesn't make equality overnight, but it's a pillar of human rights and human equality. That if you get sick, you don't need money. It's not about how rich you are, or your life's not gonna be ruined because you went bankrupt because you went to the hospital. Man, it's such a basic thing.
Yeah, it should be a human right.
Yeah.
It should definitely be a human right. And that, I mean, like I said, we live in capitalist America where everything becomes about money. So as long as you keep people sick with the foods that they're eating, that becomes a food justice issue. As long as you're keeping people sick and they need pharmaceuticals, and if you know, pharmaceutical companies get rich based off the fact that you're eating very poorly and destroying your health. So I think that's what scares people when you talk about free healthcare. Well, not so much people that benefit from you and I being sick. Yeah. And I think that's what it comes down to. And these people have the power of media and the power to convince people that free healthcare is actually worse for the general population. And I just, like I said, I don't know how people fell for that, but it all comes down to taking care of your health. Your health is your responsibility. I mean, you can't destroy your health with foods full of pesticides, GMOs, and all these other things that are harmful to us, and then you want to rely on medication, pharmaceuticals to get you better. And I think that's what this country does. We're so lazy in regards to our health that we want to rely on these things that we really don't need. If we were just to take care of our health and put our health first, we wouldn't have to worry about that. I mean, I think if you put your health first, you really wouldn't have to worry about so much of a healthcare plan. It would minimize what you need from a healthcare plan. But we don't live in a society like that. We live in a society where everybody wants everything now.
Yeah.
So this
Press this button, take this pill, solve that problem. Yeah.
right.
Rather than deal with the roots. I mean, I imagine that's something to do with why you're a vegan yourself. Why a lot of us are. So.
I mean, listen, I'm guilty of eating junk food too. You know.
Yeah, me too. But in moderation. In moderation.
Right. But
Yeah.
I know at the end of the day that I have to put foods in my body that my body will benefit from, so that I don't have a sickness somewhere in my elder years. I understand that my health is my priority or in my responsibility, and I have to take care of that. I don't want to have to depend on medicine when I get older, and especially if I don't have a good healthcare plan and I can't afford it. Then where does that leave me?
Yeah. So we were talking about, we went from police brutality to systemic racism. So we're kind of zooming out to a big picture, which is obviously a human rights issue. So I want to ask you, are the reasons that you fight for human rights, for black rights, related in any way to the reason you fight for animal rights? Are they completely separate? Or what does that mean to you?
How do I answer that? Are they? They are separate, but they're not that different. The reason I became vegan was because I've seen the correlation between animal agriculture and American slavery. I'll use a great example, and a lot of people might get upset with me for using this example, but just understand where I'm coming from and try to listen to what I'm saying. You take, for instance, the mother cow. From the time she's born, she is a product. She's a commodity. She's put to labor. She's enforcibly impregnated. After 9 months, they take her child. Depending on the gender of this child, they either put it to work and raise it to be another milking cow if it's a female, or they take it if it's a boy and use it for meat. After she goes through this process of giving birth, maybe 4 or 5 times throughout her life, and being abused for her milk, and having something taken away from her so that others can benefit from it, they kill her so that people can have steak and hamburgers. During slavery, young girls were raised to be women during slavery. They would work these young girls into women, rape them, take their children, sell them off to other plantations, and work this poor woman until she couldn't work anymore and just dig a hole and bury her in the ground. That's just one example of the correlation between what happens to animals on factory farms and what happened to black Americans during slavery. And I seen that parallel, and I decided that I didn't want to be a part of the suffering of animals anymore. Animals should not suffer for me. Who am I that these animals have to endure a lifetime of trauma, violence, and murder just so I can enjoy a meal? And once I came to that realization, I stopped. And once I seen the correlation between that and the history of my ancestors, a light went off in my head. So I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to contribute to that suffering anymore. Like, animals are not going to suffer because of me. And if I can do something about it, then I was going to speak up and let other people know exactly what goes on behind slaughterhouse walls in the same fashion that I would with human rights. I mean, human rights and animal rights are not that different, and I can't see myself fighting for one and not the other. They do meet at an intersection at some point, and both issues have to be addressed. I think all social justice issues at some point meet at an intersection and have to be addressed, but specifically with issues of black people in America and factory farming and animal rights. I think they do have similarities, and that's why I fight for both.
And you know, you're not alone in that belief. Dexter Scott King, Martin Luther King's son,
Right.
Rosa Parks, Angela Davis, even Colin Kaepernick. You know, some famous vegans who are obviously also, you know, engaged in the fight for human animal rights and have said some really powerful things about why they can't be separated. You know,
Right.
and if people get mad at you for what you just said, they're about to get mad at me too, because the reason that I'm a vegan and that I'm an animal rights activist has a lot to do, like, I'm of Jewish ancestry and my grandfather was in Auschwitz for all of World War II. And I remember going to my first vigil with Toronto Cow Safe, to a slaughterhouse for the first time, and seeing the cows in the trucks and making eye contact with them. And I don't know if you probably do know this, that they sent Jews to the death camps and to slave labor camps in cattle cars. That's how they shipped them there.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, that's always tied. It's like, oh, they treated us like animals. Yeah, well, the PS to that is, why are we still doing this to animals? When, like, it's not only that we don't have to do it to survive. We're literally killing ourselves by killing animals, by, you know, the number one cause and the number two cause of death, heart disease, cancer. You know, not to mention diabetes, not to mention the climate emergency. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that if it wasn't for that family history, I'd still be vegan, I'd still be an animal rights activist. But that was one of those things that, you know, going to all the Holocaust museums as a kid and hearing my grandfather's stories, it was just like, nah, how am I going to be on the wrong side of history now? And, you know.
Right.
Yeah, so, I mean, as far as how those issues overlap in really specific ways, a lot of people may have heard that one of the coronavirus hotspots is slaughterhouses. They probably call them meat processing facilities, but they mean slaughterhouses. And who works in a slaughterhouse? Who takes a job that has one of the most highest physical injury rates, a job that gives you PTSD? It's just stabbing animals all day long and cutting up their bodies. But people who have no other options. It's a lot of it's undocumented workers. It's poor people, and so, you know, to all the white people who are posting, you know, an all black thing on Instagram saying Black Lives Matter, just making various statements. That's cool. I think it's good to show your support. I'm not trying to discourage that, but it's really easy to just kind of make a statement like that. But on a daily basis, the way you're actually impacting people, if you're buying dead animals, you're demanding that somebody work in a slaughterhouse for you. You know, you're demanding that somebody deal with those conditions. So the event that we did with the Animal Safe movement, there was actually slaughterhouse workers joining with us, calling for people to boycott meat. Which, you know, it's about me. I don't agree with calling dead animals meat. I call them dead animals, dead cows, dead chickens. I call it, you know, body parts, because vegans can eat meat. Now we have Beyond Meat. But the idea is to boycott slaughterhouses. You know, if you don't want to support that industry for the coronavirus, for the health of the workers, you know, that's one way they overlap. So, sorry, that wasn't a question. I just wanted to mention it.
You make a very good point. It just shows you how animal agriculture affects everybody. From different cultures and different nationalities. I mean, everybody has their hand in animal abuse in some way or another. And that's why I said that these issues kind of overlap into one another. So it's important that we address it on all fronts, human rights and animal rights, and everything that entails human rights. So it's not something that can be ignored. I mean, there's a lot of organizations out there that believe that well, not a lot, but there's an organization out there that believes that human rights is not a big issue in their eyes. They focus primarily on animals. You cannot focus primarily on animals while people are still suffering. Yeah. I made this point earlier today by saying, all right, the black people in the black community believe that white people care more about animals than they do about black lives. And to some degree that's true. How do you get them to see this another way? How do you get black people to understand that there are people out there that do care about animal rights but also care about black lives? You have to be present. You have to stand up for their rights just as much as you do the animals. And I know a lot of people say, well, oh, you're taking the focus off of animals. I don't see that.
Yeah.
I don't see how fighting for one social justice issue will affect another one. I just think that there are people that would just rather ignore the suffering of others because it doesn't affect them. So they have the luxury of focusing primarily on animals. And what I don't understand is, as an organization, and you want people, you want diversity, you want people from all walks of life to join you in this fight for animal rights, but when they have issues, you can't be present for them.
Yeah, nowhere.
You can't have it both ways. In my from just my perspective, you can't have it both ways. Mm-hmm. You want black people, you want Latinos, you want gays, disabled, whoever. You want these people to stop treating animals in such a way. You want them to stand up for animal rights. Stand up for them. Let them know that you care about them as much as you do the animals.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's such a foolish mentality of like, no, we're just gonna just focus on animals, and ignore human rights. First of all, like, the idea that that's coming from, because I know I'm familiar with that argument. They're like, oh, well, certain human things are too controversial, so we don't want to take a side. That'll turn people away from veganism. In the context of George Floyd's murder, like, there's no two sides to this. Like, we saw him get murdered on camera.
Right.
The only person who would be okay with that is like a Nazi, is like a KKK. So I really don't think you should be worried about offending the KKK by saying George Floyd's murder was wrong. But on a deeper level, though, it's like you're saying, like, if you break down these walls, it's win-win. It's not lose-lose. Like, for example, everyone's using social media these days. I've been posting a lot about Black Lives Matter over the last week. I lost a bunch of followers. These are racist people who, frankly, like, I don't know why you ever followed me in the first place if you were racist. But I've also gained a bunch of followers who are they're not animal rights activists. They're people who are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, who are involved in human rights movement. Whether they're black or white, doesn't matter. And now those people who are not vegan are going to get exposed to an animal rights message. So on the one hand, I'm trying to expose people who are just committed to the fight for veganism, for animal rights, to human rights issues, to black rights issues, and vice versa. And this is the reason I'm glad you brought up, is because the internet creates echo chambers, right? Hashtag everything. If you hashtag everything vegan or something like that, you're mainly going to reach vegans. You're mainly only going to, and then you're not helping animals at all, because those people already don't eat animals. So what are you doing for them? Whereas
exactly.
Right? You go to a Black Lives Matter march, if you go to an environmental march, if you go to an immigrants' rights march, if you're simultaneously helping people who need help, you're standing with people who need help, and you're also helping animals, because you're an ambassador at that point. So I think that mentality is just backwards, to keep us separate. And I think that part of the ways that vegans are going to take over the world, we'll get to 51% of the population and outlaw slaughterhouses, outlaw the murder of animals, is when we build those bridges, when we start smashing down these echo chambers and start connecting with all these other social justice progressive movements. So that's my 2 cents.
I agree. Yeah, we have to branch out, like you said. Like, we're basically preaching to the choir at this point, and in order for you to break out of that and to reach other people, you have to go and show that you actually care about what these people are going through, whether you can identify with it or not, whether you can relate to it or not. I think I care about multiple issues, because I don't want to say I'm an empath. I don't like when people refer to themselves as an empath, but I can feel what people are going through. My gay and lesbian brothers and sisters, my Latino brothers and sisters. Was it last year, the year before, when we were dealing with this situation of Donald Trump locking people up at the border, separating their parents from their children? That broke my heart. And it had nothing to do with the fact that they were Mexican or Latino. They were human beings. These are parents. Like, I put myself in that position. I have children. Like, what if somebody took my children away from me? What would I do? How would I feel? And these people
Yeah.
are going through the same thing, but they're going through it in real time. And these are issues that need to be addressed. And I don't understand how anybody who's not Latino can justify what the president did. Because when it happened, a lot of people said, well, oh, they deserved it because they put their kids in danger. How could you say something like that with a straight face and mean it? Especially somebody who has children. Put yourself in their shoes. Forget the fact that they're Latino. Forget the fact that they're from another country or nationality. These are human beings we're talking about. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people, is that they lose the fact that we're human. And regardless of where we're from, we all go through the same thing. We're no different. And that's why I embrace all of these struggles. And I will continue to be a voice for everyone, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We go through the same thing. And I hear a lot of vegans say that they don't want to stand up for human rights issues because these are people that contribute to animal cruelty. You know why they contribute to animal cruelty? Because you don't do anything to reach out to these people and explain to them why it's unnecessary to do so, because you don't see them as somebody who you could potentially change. You see them as somebody who just abuses animals.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna want to listen to you. Like I can tell you firsthand, because I'm black, and I used to get this a lot. I don't get it anymore, but black people used to comment on my Instagram page, why do you care about animals more than you do black lives? We're dying out here in the streets, and you're fighting for animals. First of all, they don't know me. Second of all, it's important that I do fight for both, and it's not a competition over. I hate that these social justice movements becomes a competition. I hate that black people feel like they have to compete with animals, or they have to compete with the gay community. It's not a competition. It's about doing the right thing. We still have a long way to go as far as equality, but we don't want to see what other people. We don't want to see what other people go through, the things that we went through. Basically, I know I don't. We had so much of a struggle. I don't want to see gay people have to fight for as long as we have for them to get rights. But at the same time, I want gay people to stand next to me when a situation like what we're dealing with now happens. Stand next to me the way I stand next to you. That this is why I believe in intersectionality. We need to help each other. We have to recognize that we are both oppressed, and we need each other. We need each other's voices to uplift each other. And the same thing goes for the animal rights community. We need each other's voices to lift each other up. You're not going to stop cruelty to animals if you're not reaching out to different cultures and races of people, because they're not going to want to hear you if all you're talking about is fucking animals all day.
Yeah. And also, human nature is such that, like, if people see, well, this is an entirely white crowd of people, that's kind of weird, Like, why is it that there's no diversity here, And that's
Right.
that's a problem, And if that's like if someone lives in a small town and it's entirely white people, okay, then that's understandable. But if you live in a big city that's diverse, and your animal rights group doesn't look like that city, that's a big problem, And
Right.
it shows that you're not doing, you're missing out. You're not doing the work that you should be doing to build those bridges. But you mentioned how you get criticism of people saying, "Oh, you care about animals more than people," and I get that same criticism. And oftentimes, people they're not human rights activists. They're not like they're in the streets and then they're mad at me for not being in the streets. No, these are people who do nothing, but they get mad at when I bring up animal rights. They're like, "Oh, but what about what about Syria? What about a human rights issue?" I'm like, "You're not doing anything about Syria either." But the reason I bring this up,
I don't mean to cut you off, but I realize one thing is that the people that are the loudest don't advocate for anybody at all.
Right. Yeah. And just, I feel like every vegan has dealt with this at some point, and just a response I want y'all to remember is that what, in my opinion, is the biggest human rights crisis in the world, in terms of raw suffering and death, is mass starvation. There's 9 million people dying from starvation every year. And we're at the same time giving food to 65 billion farm animals. And that's not a coincidence at all. It takes up to 20 times more land to grow, a gram of protein from a dead animal than it does to get it from plants. So when people are demanding animal flesh, what they're also demanding is an enormous amount of land. We saw the Amazon being set on fire.
Right.
Be used to grow animals, which drives up the cost of land for subsistence, poor subsistence farmers, so they can't afford it.
Right.
And they often will go to cities and live in slums or be homeless. And it drives up the cost of food to the point that the poorest people in the world can't eat.
Right.
And they die of malnutrition or starvation. So you can actually do it. Like, one of the biggest things you can do for human rights, say you don't have money and you can't like donate $1 million. You're living paycheck to paycheck. Just by not eating dead animals, you're not contributing anymore. You're not contributing as much to global starvation. You're helping. You're freeing up grain. You're freeing up land that poor people can have. So it's such an obvious way these things intersect, and that's like, I want human rights activists to know that. I want animal rights activists to know that, so we inform people. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the arguments on the internet is like people trying to one up each other, be like you said, a competition, right? When it's like, let's just put our egos aside for a second and say, if you actually want to make the world a better place, here's a way to do it. Like, you don't have to think that I'm right or something like that. Just like, here's a piece of information, and and just on a very related note, because I don't forget this, the same thing is true of climate change. Obviously, animal agriculture is a huge contributor to climate change, which disproportionately impacts poor people. Because when the ocean goes up, it's 100 million people in Bangladesh are going to be underwater. It's poor people who are dealing with crop failure, with water shortages, who can't afford to bring in Evian water, Fiji water from somewhere else. They're just going to die of thirst. That's already happening.
Right.
From genocide in Darfur, which is caused by climate change, to civil war and genocide in Syria, which climate change is a major contributing factor. So,
right. There are so many things that you mentioned that kind of cross paths with each other. They meet at an intersection. Mm-hmm. There's an animal rights issue. There's an environmental issue. There's a food justice issue. There's so many things that kind of meet at an intersection. And it's, like I said, it's very irresponsible for someone who is vegan and an activist to say that these issues don't matter because they only care about the animals. Well, there's so many other things that we have to look at and that we have to fix, and they require a person to be an environmentalist. They require a person to speak up for the issue with food justice. They require people to speak up for poor people in America and other countries. So you cannot just be an animal rights activist without looking at these other issues and speaking out and doing something about it. It takes that kind of commitment to make a change. It's easy to say, oh, well, the easiest thing is to go vegan, but you have to put the work in. You have to, when these issues arise, you have to be there and be counted and speak out against it. You can't be for animal liberation and not be for starving children in countries where their resources are being taken from them for the benefit of animal agriculture, that have their land taken from them for the benefit of animal agriculture. You have to speak out against these injustices. It can't just be about the animals, because like I said, everything kind of meets at an intersection, and it pretty much forces you to be an activist on all fronts. And if you're just focused on the animals, you're losing sight of the big picture, because that problem is not going to go away on its own.
Yeah. And that's like it's kind of a beautiful thing in the sense that whatever the main passion somebody has to make a difference on, whether it's regardless, just pick any issue. If you're actually going out there to other events and making bridges with people, you're arguably going to be the most effective you can be on that issue. Because other people are going to meetings, they're just stuck in their own little community echo chamber. Whereas like the person that's actually, going to different events, that's bridging with different people in person and online now, especially with coronavirus, it's harder to be face to face with people. You're actually going to be making a real difference. I think social media makes people, everyone wants likes, everyone wants follows, right? And it's easy in an echo chamber to just like kind of throw something out that makes people happy, and that's fine. Sometimes you want to make people make an inside joke amongst vegans. That's awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's the only thing that people do, then like that's just for popularity's sake. It's not for the benefit of animals. And a really practical way to by the way to deal with that is like with hashtags. With hashtags, you could break out of your own echo chamber. If you're only interested in likes, then just hashtag vegan all the time. But if you're talking about and you're actually doing something about different issues, you know, climate change, then hashtag it climate change, you know?
Right.
Or, I mean, I love to hashtag things meat and bacon all the time because then someone who's like, it works. And then I get trolls and then they're like, the trolls do their thing and they troll, but there's a ton of people who don't say anything who I know saw that and actually got that message and they're like, okay, that's the person I was trying to reach. I wasn't trying to like make a vegan go vegan. What the hell's that?
Right.
You know, like,
well, the trolls and harassment come with the territory. I mean, that's with anything. Like you have trolls in real life. Like when you're out there protesting the rodeo at MSG and you have some asshole that walks by and he has a smart ass comment because he doesn't really understand why you care so much that animals are being used for entertainment. So, I mean, you have trolls in real life and you have trolls on social media, but that comes with the territory. I mean, Martin Luther King dealt with trolls in real life. They threw rocks at him. They cursed at him and called him the N-word. You understand? Yeah. So it's one of those things that you have to deal with. And you're right. You got to use these hashtags, meat, eggs, dairy, because it reaches a broader audience, people that might not get this message otherwise. And you want to reach those people. These are the people you want to go vegan. I have a lot of people that follow me that are not vegan. They follow me because they're my friends, they're my co-workers or family members. And sometimes I'll throw things out there to shame them a little bit, to show them that you don't necessarily have to contribute to harming animals to enjoy good food or have nice clothes or enjoy certain forms of entertainment. And like that's part of the education. And like you said, a lot of us get wrapped up in this echo chamber where we're pretty much entertaining and educating each other to the point where it's like, all right, we know this already. What the fuck are we doing about it?
Yeah.
You have to go outside. You have to get out of your comfort zone, get out of your community. And I noticed that there's so many people and they reach out to me and they tell me all the time that it's because of me they started doing activism. Because otherwise they would have never thought about it. So now they're in their community, they're calling PETA and they're ordering leaflets and they're doing activism in their own community and starting little groups where they go out and educate people. And that's a good thing because that's one of the ways you're going to change the dynamic of how we live and how we treat animals. It's not by, like you said, using the same hashtags over and over again where pretty much the message just becomes redundant. We have to go out of our comfort zone, have these uncomfortable conversations at work, at home, with our friends that are tired of hearing about it. But you know what? Let them get tired of hearing about it to the point where, you know what? Maybe one day they'll make a change. Maybe one day they'll decide to have the Beyond Burger as opposed to the real thing. And that's what we're aiming towards. We're trying to make the world a better place. And going vegan is definitely one of the key aspects of making the world a better place for not just us, but for all species.
Because it's a Saturday night, I got to point this out. Because on a related note, I think there's a lot of vegans out there who and I understand this. They don't want to necessarily go to events where dead animals are being cooked up. They don't want to go to dinners. They don't want to socialize with people, and they avoid it. Now, it's completely understandable because you've seen so much suffering that you don't want to be around a corpse. You don't want to see a corpse on a barbecue. But if you prioritize the animals over, your own feelings about seeing that, and you realize what I need to be doing, this is obviously when coronavirus is over, is socializing more, is going to those things, is going to those dinners and saying, being the person at the table. If you're not the voice for animals, then there's no voice at the table. And not saying you go there and give a whole speech about it while people are eating, but even just existing, even just being there, and being a healthy person, just that, you're an emblem for veganism, for animal rights. And then people open up, have a conversation. Oh, what are you gonna order? What are you having? And even not necessarily food events, but just going out there into the world and not isolating ourselves.
Right.
Sorry, I just want to, yeah. That's a funny thing to say now during the pandemic because we can't really go out and do anything. But I just want to say it so people don't cut off friendships cut off family members and think you're doing any good for the animals by doing that because, oh, this person wouldn't go vegan the first time I sent them a piece of information. Now I'm mad at them and like we're not going to talk anymore. Like if yeah. So I'm going off on that. Is there any I asked all the questions that I had written in advance. Is there any other things that you wanted to discuss or anything you wanted to bring up?
Sometimes it could be uncomfortable, but you don't change by staying comfortable all the time. So, I mean, I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the questions, and like I said, I hope that I answered them to the best of my ability. I hope that somebody walks away from this interview with a new perspective on life or a new outlook on how we treat each other and how we treat animals, because that's really what my whole mission is right now in life, is to change how people view each other and other species, because our existence depends on it. And I know a lot of people might not understand that, but it's an awakening. I think these conversations have to happen. I think they should happen more often, and sometimes it could be uncomfortable, but you don't change by staying comfortable all the time. So, I mean, I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the questions, and like I said, I hope that I answered them to the best of my ability. I hope that somebody walks away from this interview with a new perspective on life or a new outlook on how we treat each other and how we treat animals, because that's really what my whole mission is right now in life, is to change how people view each other and other species, because our existence depends on it. And I know a lot of people might not understand that, but if we keep going at the rate we're going as far as animal agriculture is concerned, deforestation, starvation, racism, we're only going to destroy each other. And I don't think anybody wants that at the end of the day. I think we all want to live healthy, productive lives, and we have to have these uncomfortable conversations in order to grow and be better people. So, I mean, I really appreciate this interview or this sit down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that just on a positive note, I do think, call me an optimist, but I do think most people are good at heart. And I've seen stats to back that up. Only like 4 to 6% of the population are sociopathic, meaning they have no empathy. I think most people are good people, and it's either through miseducation or just through ignorance that we do things that harm each other or harm animals. And like, the explosion of activism after George Floyd's murder, I wish it never happened, obviously. Wish the murder never happened. But the activism is showing that, there's a lot of people across America and across the world who already felt that felt a very strong way about racism, but something sparked now. And you see so many people showing up and making a difference. So,
Unfortunately, it took for something like this to happen to wake people up, to kind of put the spotlight on just how this I'm at a loss for words right now, but basically I think what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of inequality, a lot of injustice in this country that people weren't aware of before, and now they're starting to become aware of it because of what happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. They're starting to see that there is a problem, and it needs to be addressed, and it has to be fixed. And a lot of people are willing to step up and do what it takes to fix that problem. So unfortunately, this had to happen so people can actually see the injustice and want to do something about it.
Yeah, and you can imagine how many times it's happened off camera, right? That's
absolutely
tragedy don't see.
Absolutely.
So massive thank you for taking this time to sit down with me twice, because the first interview didn't record. Before you go, Vigilante Vegan is most people know you as an Instagram. They can follow you there, but you run a bunch of pages. So I want to make sure we don't forget. Vegan Seinfeld is for comic relief. Good message. You mentioned another one that was focused on mental health. What was the tag for that one again?
There is beauty in the darkness. It really focuses on mental health. I myself deal with depression and anxiety, and I started that page. Well, first, that's the title of a book that I wrote, first of all, and I wrote that book from a place of darkness. And this is going to sound crazy, but I'm most creative when I'm in a dark place. I would rather not be in a dark place and just not be productive and creative in that way. But like when I'm in a dark place, a lot of my creativity comes from that. And I wrote a lot of poems about depression and anxiety, and I compiled them into a book. And I got a good response from it. People really responded to that book. And I said, you know what? I'm going to start a page so people can reach out to me, or I can communicate with people that might be dealing with this. Because a lot of times people will message me and tell me that they're going through things and they can't speak to anybody. And I'll be an ear for their problems. I might not have all the answers, but I think sometimes people dealing with depression and anxiety just want to be heard. You don't always have to have the answers to what they're going through. They just want to be heard. I know from my perspective, that rings true. So I started the page to reach out to people that are dealing with these issues that might not have anybody to turn to, and it's not as large as the primary page, Vigilante Vegan, but it's there in case people need to reach out. And I write a lot of poetry, and I post a lot of poetry on there. A lot of it is self-deprecating.
Okay.
But this is what helps me deal with mental health issues that I have. So I put it out there for people to, relate to. And
that's so much more crucial now. Obviously, people are in isolation. Everybody's dealing with that more so now than ever. So, wow. Okay, so I'm gonna put all that in the video details. I guess again Saturday night. I'll leave it on a comedic note, just because it's partially thanks to Vegan Seinfeld, A.K.A. you, that I really started watching Curb Your Enthusiasm. And started enjoying it because I'd already seen all of Seinfeld, so I'd seen every single episode. But I'd been sleeping on Curb, which is hilarious, and just people need something to unwind on the weekend. First of all, watch Seinfeld, but also Curb Your Enthusiasm is hilarious. I don't know if you have any recommendations, good stuff for people to relax with, just to de-stress. What
recommendations? I mean. A lot of times when I'm dealing with anxiety, like I will watch Seinfeld. I like to relate to things that brought me a measure of happiness when I was younger. Like when times were simpler, when I didn't have the responsibilities that I have now. And Seinfeld was definitely one of those things. I always look forward to Thursday nights as a teenager. And I recorded every episode, and it became my favorite show. And I don't know how I came up with the idea. I mean, I know how I came up with the idea for Vegan Seinfeld, but it kind of like took on a life of its own. Like I would post these memes of Seinfeld doing vegan jokes, and then it just turned into me capturing moments from the show and making it relate to veganism or animal rights. People seem to like it. There's a
lot of references to. There's a lot of things that overlap. And when I was watching the show, there's a couple times I had to pull out my phone and actually record what was on screen. So I'm like, yeah. Jerry, man, that should be a next outreach. I do a celebrity outreach series to why certain people need to go vegan. Should be to Jerry Seinfeld next. He's a good guy.
Right,
I feel like he's already thinking about some of that stuff, So.
The funny thing about that page, who follows that page? The actress Kristen Bauer. She played Man Hands.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
She followed me on Vigilante Vegan, and I seen a blue check next to her name. I was like, who is this person? And I looked her up. Turns out she's an actress. She played in a couple of TV shows, and one of her credits is that she's Man Hands. She's one of Jerry's.
Okay.
She's one of Jerry's ex-girlfriends on the show, so she follows the page. She's a big fan of it, so I'm kind of proud of that. That somebody who had a hand in the show is actually a fan of the page.
Yeah, we got to collab. That's I have yeah, we got to collab on that video maybe in the future. There's too much stuff to do first, but maybe why Jerry Seinfeld needs to go vegan, and maybe she'll help get the message to him.
Yeah, I tried tagging him in a couple of videos to like try to get his attention. He's a big celebrity. He's not gonna pay me any mind. I did try to reach out to him, and hopefully like he'll see it and find it humorous and you know kind of want to make a change. But you know a lot of people don't know I run that page. I don't know. Are you familiar? Do you know who Joyce Friedman is?
Joyce Freeman? I don't believe so.
She's an activist here in New York. She's on the board of Voters for Animal Rights. Long story short, this was shortly after the foie gras hearing. We were looking to ban the sale of foie gras in New York. I don't know if you were aware of that.
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah, there were a couple of animal rights bills that we were looking to push as well. So we went out to eat, and we went to this French vegan restaurant in the Village. And Joyce was telling me about this vegan Seinfeld page that she loves so much. And I'm sitting there, I'm laughing. I said, Joyce, I said, you know who vegan Seinfeld is? I'm vegan Seinfeld. And she couldn't believe. A lot of people don't know that. I mean, there are people that do, but there's still a lot of people that don't know I run that page. They're gonna know now after today.
Yeah, you got to put it. I mean, I guess if you have space in your bio, I'm Vigilante Vegan, or not, or you stay incognito. It's up to you.
I don't mind that people know. I think it's funny when they don't know it's me, but I don't mind that people know.
Yeah.